The RAB was on the ground at NAB Show 2026 in Las Vegas. The convention brought together nearly 60,000 attendees, including over 1,100 exhibitors, alongside high-profile keynote speakers and forward-looking sessions spanning broadcasting, media, advertising, and entertainment. The conversation throughout the week for radio was clear. The medium continues to evolve. The new opportunities and a shared commitment to moving forward with one voice. We are excited to share the latest Radio on Main Street podcast series, featuring conversations with leading voices across the industry. Explore perspectives on advertising and sales, digital, innovation, AI, storytelling, content creation, community service, and philanthropy. And you will hear firsthand the passion that is driving their work, along with their outlook on what's ahead for radio. Radio on Main Street, literally in the middle of the action as we record our podcast, day one, minute one of the 2026 NAB. Curtis, welcome, and thank you for having us.
I'm thrilled to be here, and look at this space. It's pretty incredible. Just the energy in here. This is something that we have lived through over the last several years, the evolution of the Las Vegas Convention Center, which is our home for the NAB show. And we are finally on the other side of a lot of improvements and enhancements, and it just looks incredible over here. You can already feel the energy, the room, the doors just opened, and we're flooded with people. So I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to dive into the future of media and the future of broadcast.
Well, first of all, to our audience, as we record, it is right here in the middle of April. You're consuming in May, but to capture this essence, there's a vibe which is great for the industry, and again, for radio and television and the other aspects and the tentacles that the NAB is involved with, it's very important. When you see the technology that's on display, that's also a lean in, to our consumers, that technology is vibrant, our industry is vibrant. There's a buzz. I love that. That's one of the things I get coming to this convention.
Yeah. It's funny. I was saying to my kids as I was leaving for Las Vegas a few days ago, and I've got a 13, 11, and an 8-year-old, talking to them about what was going to be happening in Las Vegas this week. And, they're focused in the way that they consume content on their devices and streaming and social media and everything else. And I was explaining to them just the amount of energy in what we do here in broadcast and local and connectedness. And I think it's underscored by the fact that we're going to have 60,000 people this week here in Las Vegas to talk about the future of this incredible industry. You look at the tools that are on display here for content creation to allow us to engage in a more meaningful way with our audience, in a way to produce more compelling programming. You can see the opportunities that are in front of us, and I think that the collective commitment to that is really on display here in Las Vegas this week. So we're thrilled.
Well, what you see on the screen, is created through technology with our partners Inco, and we love the idea that we can have these conversations, but immerse ourselves in the technology. Yeah. And so you get a real example of what this looks like today in 2026. And I was talking to the Inco team before we started, and we talked about how technology has evolved and how much different this looks than it did last year, and how much different that it looks in terms of all of this since 2024. That's just 24 months ago.
Absolutely. Look, I think what you see happening at this show, and it's emblematic of what's happening in the industry, is that we're breaking down barriers. Right, so this is not just a set of conversations around local radio. It's not just a set of conversations around audio platforms. It's not just a set of conversations around the future of television and streaming. It's about audience connectivity. And if you're going to be relevant in this ecosystem, you need to be engaging with your audiences in every way that they're going to consume your content. And what we're doing here at this show is trying to break down those walls, show how you can do that holistically, and enable our members at the National Association of Broadcasters, your members at the RAB, to take advantage of that multi-platform connectivity. And I think if we do that, we're serving our audiences. We know that the hyper-local content, the personalities, the embeddedness in the communities, that there's still a consumer demand for that. We're just modernizing the way that we deliver it.
We've done some repositioning of the industry at the RAB as we refer to the radio industry truly as the audio leader. But when you break it down, Curtis, it's streaming, it's podcast, it's broadcast, it's social, it's digital, it's influencers. All of that equals radio today.
Yes.
I mean, what's it going to be tomorrow?
Well, I think what's important about how that collective engagement is radio today is it underscores, well, why does the listener tune in to our stations, our personalities through all of that platforms, rather than all the competition that's out there? And it's because we're doing the thing that Spotify, that Apple, that Pandora will never do, which is we're in the communities that we serve, right? We are engaged with those Main Street businesses, with the listeners. We're at the farmers market in a way that no other medium is, and there's a relevance to that local connectivity that is missing from other forms of media. It used to be the case that media of all forms could bring us together. I think you can see that many forms of national media are monetizing divisions and silos, and we could have a longer conversation about that, especially what's happening in some forms of social media. To me, local radio, whether it's consumed through the dial on your dashboard or all the other ways to engage that you just articulated, it's something different than that. It is bringing that sense of community, of connectedness to the listener, and people are craving it. And if we provide our members with the tools to reach those audiences, I think we're going to continue to win.
We believe in that strongly at RAB. I know NAB does as well. Let's move to Capitol Hill. Let's move to some policy here in a minute. You do a great job with this. And by the way, I've complimented you. You and I are friends, and I was on your board when I was a broadcaster in Indiana and Illinois, and got to see the inner workings of the NAB and the team. And you and I had a conversation once, and I told you that you're in the door business. As you keep the door shut on threats and open to opportunities, we're in the hamburger selling business because we're here to move product and control outcomes and provide wins. And we're doing all of that work on behalf of an amazing industry. But you've been busy. You have been very busy. And again, as we record this and we know when it plays back, there's some variables that are in play around some regulation and some larger issues. But the NAB has been busy.
We've been very busy, and I love the way you put it. I've got my shoulder out, trying to keep this door wide open for some major opportunities in Washington, D.C. that I think will be essential to the future of radio. And for the NAB, there's two major priorities in that regard. The first is ensuring that the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act gets over the finish line. And for those listeners who are wondering, why are you sitting at the NAB show talking about the future of media, all the different ways that we engage with our audiences in the most modernized of ways, yet heading back to Washington, D.C. and talking about AM radio? Let me be very clear that this AM radio legislation is a proxy for radio's placement in the dashboard of the future. So what this bill would do is ensure that every newly manufactured automobile needs to include access to AM radio, and it needs to ensure that that access to radio is prominent in the increasingly crowded screen-based experience in the automobile. The bill is incredible because it brings together really some unlikely bedfellows here. You've got folks on all sides of the aisle, the lead sponsors in the Senate, Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, Ed Markey, left-leaning Democrat from Massachusetts. On the House side, Gus Bilirakis, conservative from Florida, has teamed up with Frank Pallone, who's the top Democrat on the Energy and Commerce Committee. The White House has endorsed the bill. So really, in this age of hyper-politicization, where politicians by and large are incentivized to go into their corners. I think we've been able to break through that because of the unique value of radio, and we're on the doorstep of getting that over the finish line here now that the bill has moved through both the House and the Senate Commerce Committees. And at the FCC, we are exceedingly busy working with the team there. Chairman Carr has expressed a real openness to modernizing the rules that govern the number of local FM stations that any one company can own in a given market. Working very, very closely here now that the commission has wrapped up its quadrennial review. More than 100 members of Congress have weighed in with the commission supporting modernization of these rules, dozens of community groups. So with everything else happening in Washington, D.C., and really the political winds doing everything they can to shut that door of opportunity, as you put it, as policymakers turn their view to the upcoming elections, we're working every day to keep that door open so that we can get these things over the finish line over the next few months, and I think we're well positioned to do it.
You made a critical point in my mind, and I've been on Capitol Hill with members of state associations, and again, I was started this articulation when I was still running the Newhoff Company before I joined RAB full-time, but the connection to the community, the members of Congress that know what's actually occurring back in their districts, they see it when they go home and they sit down with their local broadcaster. And their local broadcaster, who they know the name of their son or grandchild who's playing on a Little League baseball game, they know the challenges that are happening back in that district, and they know that the connection back home is their local broadcaster. Like, there is such great strength. I had a conversation with a banker friend of mine prior to the state leadership conference of the NAB, and again, the RAB was thrilled to be there and supporting that effort. And my banker friend said, because I was driving to the airport, he goes, "You're lucky. You're lucky you're a broadcaster, because the same people don't talk to us like they talk to you." But it goes back to the connection, that strength.
Yeah, I think you hit it the nail on the head here, which is that the policymakers see it firsthand when they go home. I always say that, across our litany of advocacy issues that the NAB and our broad tent advocates, our adversaries are some of the most moneyed interests in Washington, D.C., whether you're talking about the large wireless companies or big tech or the entertainment industry. And our competitive advantage will never be able to outspend those entities, but our competitive advantage is that policymakers live and breathe our story when they go home. And, the changes in the marketplace that underpin the need for the type of regulatory and legislative action that we're speaking about here, an assurance of access to radio in the dashboard, as well as the need to gain more scale to compete. We actually don't need to do a lot to explain what's underpinning that story, because policymakers see it. They understand that these rules that are premised on the idea that broadcasters only compete against other broadcasters for advertising, that's not the world we're living in. These rules that are premised on the idea that we have a monopoly on listenership. Everyone looks at what's happening in audio right now, sees the podcasts, sees the streaming services, and understands that radio is rushing to catch up and compete. And in the dashboard, in the car, I think there's an increasing understanding that the automakers and the tech companies have every incentive to monetize what's happening in the automobile, right? Whether that's through subscription services or whether it's by using our data. And AM and FM radio sit outside of that ecosystem. Policymakers see that, they know it. So that's why I think we're well positioned, even in an environment where I think policymakers are a little loath to go and intervene in the marketplace. I think there's just a real bipartisan want to ensure that we can compete on a level playing field.
I spoke last year to the Ohio broadcasters, and I've said this too to NASBA, the National Alliance of State Broadcast Associations for Inside Baseball, but talking about who your competitors are. And I remember being in the room in Ohio last year, and I said, look to your left and look to your right. That is not your competitor. Whether you're radio or you're television, and using fact-based data to say that if you look at how much revenue Google generated in the first quarter from just advertising, it far exceeded in a few weeks what our entire industry generated in an entire year. And in television, it's about another 10 days for local television revenue was generated for an entire year. They got all that handled in January. But at the end of the day,
Right.
though, Curtis, at the end of the day, who is there when the flood waters rise in Wisconsin? Who's there when the tornado comes through Oklahoma? Who's there when there is a mass shooting in some urban location and the community needs to be connected?
Yeah.
Who's there? It's the broadcaster. You know, in my particular case, it's the radio broadcasters, and that's the magic. But to your point, the competitive landscape is not what it once was. It's not 1996 anymore.
It's not. And first off, no one can articulate that story better than you can, Mike. And it's why you were such a valuable member of the NAB board and why I'm grateful that you still come to Washington, D.C. for our fly-ins and tell that story, because with everything happening in this very disrupted media landscape, we need to remind policymakers of something they know, but sometimes with all the swirl, just need to have that reminder of the role that we're playing during those times of emergency when other forms of communication fail, during those worst of times where the community needs some healing, we're playing that role. One thing that I think RAB has done exceptionally well is this notion of one voice, because I think you are exactly right, which is that we are fighting for radio, and radio is competing with Apple Music and Spotify. Radio is competing for advertising dollars with Google and Facebook. Radio is competing for the most relevant programming with these global behemoths. It's not about any individual station. And as radio succeeds as a platform, enhanced by the connectivity through those other means of engagement that you spoke about, the podcast, the digital newsletters, social media, but as radio succeeds, rising tide lifts all ships.
Right.
We need consumers to step into the automobile and to engage with the radio dial. Then we're in the game. Every radio station in America benefits from that. And we do need to speak with one voice because, we're exceptionally fragmented. The fact that you still have hundreds of separately owned radio stations, and we're trying to get them aligned in our conversations with the automakers, trying to get them aligned in terms of what does that screen-based experience look like? What type of metadata underlies the content? Now, this is the world that you live and breathe, but the fact of the matter is we're a step behind, because if Apple Music decides it wants to innovate, it can turn the switch and do that tomorrow. If Spotify decides that it wants to offer something new to its consumers, it can flip the switch and do that tomorrow. We need an entire industry aligned on what our end product looks like to the consumers. Thanks to the work of the RAB and others, we're getting there.
Oh, we got just a couple of minutes left in our time together. Thank you. Literally, as we record this, it was the first minute of the first day of the show, and you chose to be together. And I think better together is another theme from RAB, but we have a collaboration on behalf of our industry. I see it beyond just our members, your members, our vendors, our partners, the ecosystem that supports this amazing industry. But if we don't work together, we're putting ourselves and our communities at risk, in my mind. So I appreciate what we do together.
I appreciate it as well. And look, we spent some time talking about the places where we're keeping the door open. We shouldn't undersell the degree to which the threats are coming from all directions. Right. The threats are coming in Washington in the form of a new performance tax, in the form of the big tech platforms who are not necessarily being regulated in the way that we need them to be regulated. New fees from performing rights organizations, from the FCC. We're continuing to push back on all of that, and meanwhile, you're continuing to push back on the threats competitively out in the marketplace. And the best way for us to push back on those threats is to tell our story effectively, remind our advertising partners, our vendors in Washington, policymakers, of what we uniquely do that no one else in media is doing. And we won't be successful telling that story if we're not telling it together. So could not agree with you more, and I'm grateful for the partnership.
Okay, get out your little chamois, and I want you to look at your crystal ball, And there's a couple of big things that need to get done, and they're literally at the goal line. I'm a big sports fan. You're a sports fan.
Yep.
Love sports analogy. We're at the goal line. We're at the goal line with AM radio. We're at the goal line in my mind around ownership rules, which and other things as well.
Yep.
So give it a shine. Look inside and tell me what's later this summer, early fall. Can you? And I know you don't like predictions, but you can give a look inside the crystal ball and see what it tells you.
I'm very optimistic that we are going to get some modernization of these local radio ownership rules, as well as passage of the AM for Every Vehicle Act this year. The exact timing on that's a little above my pay grade because unfortunately I don't have a vote in the Congress. And I certainly don't have one at the FCC, but I can tell you just based on the level of engagement and want to break through this on behalf of our champions in Washington, D.C., including the chairman of the FCC on this issue of ownership, I'm very, very confident on where we are. I also think it's important to say to your audience, we look to maximize our opportunities in every political environment. So we've had opportunities on those issues in this unique political environment. And whatever you may think of this political environment and a host of other issues outside of broadcast, there have been some unique opportunities here that we haven't necessarily had in recent years. On the flip side, I think as we look forward past November, in an event where we are dealing with a changed Washington landscape, well, there's going to be new opportunities that present themselves there as well. And so we're going to be well equipped to manage any political environment to maximize the opportunities for this industry, especially as we look forward to that next tranche of issues, which for me are really understanding how we continue to control, monetize our content as it's being scraped by these generative AI models, ensuring that we're protecting our local personalities, the sanctity of their voices and how they're used by these new tools. And frankly, from an advertising perspective, also ensuring that as businesses increasingly rely on these AI tools for their marketing plans, for the future of their businesses, that we're positioning ourselves as very, very relevant as that means of connectedness between our small business partners and the audiences that we serve. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in front of us, and we're going to take advantage of whatever the current or next political landscape looks like to maximize those opportunities.
Life is never dull, Curtis.
It is not.
Life is never dull. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And your team, they do a great job, and I appreciate you starting off your NAB adventure with us.
Yeah, well, couldn't be more thrilled to be here. 60,000 of our closest friends this week here in Washington, D.C. I'm glad you gave the opportunity to shout out our team.
Because you are always on. You said Washington, D.C.
Oh,
We're in Las Vegas.
Well, there's a lot more than 60,000
I do the same thing.
In Washington, D.C. Here in Las Vegas, 60,000 of our closest friends. But you're correct to underscore the role of our teams. We have an incredible leadership team in Karen Chupka, who's heading this event up for us. April Carty-Sip, who spearheads all of our industry affairs initiatives, all of our radio content and programming here at the show. They've got an incredible team spanning the 4 days here, and then the other 361 days of the year, ensuring that our industry stays very, very connected. So grateful for their efforts.
Curtis, thank you.
Thank you.